36 people killed in that tragic Oakland fire, and now the lawsuits could be piling up. We're going to take a look at who could be liable and how this may play out. Our panel of attorneys is here to join us. Then a man shot in the back and killed while running away, all caught on camera, but the officer still was not convicted after a mistrial was declared in South Carolina. Just how hard is it to convict somebody for this? And on this 75th anniversary of the attack on Pearl Harbor, we'll speak to a local man who was there and still has nightmares about that fateful day. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. Thank you so much for joining us on, as we said off the top, a day that will live in infamy.
The range of charges could be murder all the way to involuntary manslaughter. And until we know what the evidence shows us, there may be other charges if the evidence presents that.
That the Alameda County District Attorney talking about that fire that killed 36 people in Oakland. It happened during a dance party in a warehouse that was being used as an artist's living and working space. The city, it had received a bunch of complaints about the building, ranging from garbage and debris to illegal construction, and there was another fire back in 1988. The guy who leased the space and called it the quote-unquote ghost ship, he was interviewed on the Today Show yesterday.
I'm so sorry. I'm incredibly sorry. What do you want me to say? I'm not going to answer these questions.
Then we will call
this. I'm just going to say that I am sorry.
Then we'll end the interview there, Mr.
You have to hold my soul accountable. If you have to hold my soul accountable for believing in something.
Now, you should expect to see the lawsuits as well as potential criminal charges, as you've heard the DA mention there. The LA Times says that Bay Area attorneys already contacting family members and survivors. Wrongful death suits could target the building owner, landlord who you just heard from, contractors, engineers who worked on the site, not to mention the city of Oakland itself. Firefighters, they're also searching the wreckage, trying to determine the cause. All right, let's bring in our panel. Familiar faces on this Wednesday night. Doug Van Oys, founding partner of Carson Van Oys, focusing on corporate misconduct and selected by the Legal 500 as one of the most influential trial lawyers in the country. Jim Kasouris, a criminal defense attorney in Manhattan, sitting on the board of directors of the New York City Criminal Bar Association. He frequently lectures at New York Law School, bar associations in Queens and New York City and beyond. And Mayo Bartlett, he's an attorney at the law offices of Mayo Bartlett PLC. He's also former chief of the Bias Crimes Unit at the Westchester County DA's office. Guys, thank you for joining us. All right. Let's first start, Jimmy, on the criminal side. Exposure, I would imagine, for the landlord. But criminally, not civilly, is anybody else here potentially looking at going behind bars?
Well, it depends on who had a role in maintaining the premises. If there was, you said that there were complaints about the way it was built, the way it was constructed. But I think that for criminal charges, it has to be a lot more immediate and close in time to the actual event, so that the host of the event, who's holding it out to be a safe place, can be prosecuted for criminally negligent homicide. It can rise to the level of recklessness as well. But criminal charges are far more difficult than the civil.
And when I saw this story, one of the first things that jumped to my mind was that tragic fire in Warwick, Rhode Island, where the club owners, and there was a band playing, there was, as people may remember, there was a laser, not a laser show, but whatever, they had pyrotechnics in there, and with all the asbestos, yes, I said asbestos, that got ignited, it turned into a tinderbox, and I think we had 100 people who died. One of the owners I know served, I think, 2.5 years as a consequence for it, because he should have known better. Right?
And you should know that there's adequate means of ingress and egress in the event of a fire and so on and so forth.
And the doors in this case were locked from the outside.
Compliance with all regulations absolutely is something that's going to be looked at.
You know, Doug, the one thing that came out of this was an anger in the community over a couple things. For another night, we'll talk about the lack of affordable housing and what has become one of the most expensive counties to live in the world. But beyond that, that's a social policy issue. This wasn't a surprise to anyone. Law enforcement knew about this. The agencies within the city knew about this because of complaints that were made. This guy had many complaints filed against him as a landlord here. It was unsafe. There wasn't heat. There was everything else. And it apparently is not alone as an example. So of the names that I rattled off here before, from the contractors who worked on it, from the engineers, the architects, even promoters at the event for apparently this concert that happened that night, where do you think the most direct lines are as people that should have not only known better here, but are culpable, at least civilly, for what happened that night?
First off, what a tragedy.
Yep.
Incredible. Well, logically, it would be the owners of the property and the people that are managing the property. From there, you can go away from that, the people that were working on the property. There's also possible product suits where maybe something misfired and spark shot out of a heat or something like that. But really, everybody that's in this chain that they're talking about will be looked at civilly. And you got to remember, it's a lower standard, civil. Criminal is beyond a reasonable doubt. Civil is much lower than that. But with a tragedy like this, with so many people dying and such a big property, it looks like, I mean, everybody's going to be pretty much, the real question is going to be, and it sounds at this point to be talking about money is really a horrible thing, quite frankly,
yeah.
But really the targets in this, you'll have to look at where actually people have money and are insured, because just because somebody did something wrong, if there's no way to collect from them, then a civil suit would be fruitless.
One of the entities that I'm fascinated by this, Mayo, is the city. Now, fine, you have what appears to be a slumlord on the face of it here. There certainly was ample complaints that were made about him. It apparently was an open secret in the neighborhood. You fit all the description of this guy you can. People coming in, whether they were contractors, people doing whatever improvements, just keep going. They clearly saw something was wrong, but they took a check and they still left behind. But nonetheless, what responsibility does the city have if they aren't called for that reason, but come across something that clearly doesn't seem to be up to code? Do they have to wait for a tragedy before they have to intervene, or is it not only expected, but mandated that they do something before, obviously, a tragedy we saw?
The reason you have city codes and legislation, county, state, federal legislation, is to protect people. That's the only reason we have laws. It's not to infringe on somebody's rights or privacy or anything like that. So when the city is aware of things like this, in my mind, they're liable. If they're aware and took no action whatsoever, they're liable. And all you have to do is think of all the times that you see that, oh, Dunkin' Donuts got shut down because it wasn't clean enough. Well, and it should be. But if you have something like this where you have lots of people there, it's an attractive nuisance, you know you have people living there, and you can see that it's clearly just a recipe for disaster, the city had an obligation to come in and shut it down. And to the owner's defense, you know, he's not the one who knows that things are hazardous necessarily. Now, if he's been warned, that's a different story. But there were tenants who lived there who said that they lived there because there was nowhere else to live. And that goes towards your point about a lack of affordable housing.
But Mayo, it's not enough for him to say, I didn't know, I didn't think. He took checks from people. And if you're a landlord and somebody writes you a check, you have the obligation to know what the codes are, to know what the requirements are. It's not incumbent to say, hey, nobody told me I couldn't stick 40 people in here to a room, or that I had to provide heat to people, or that whatever else.
I'm only saying that I don't believe it's malicious. However, I will go back and revisit what Jim was saying. I think that there are some pretty clear criminal charges that he can face. I think you can certainly look at reckless endangerment if he's been made aware that there are hazardous circumstances at that location, because at that point, he knowingly is allowing people to stay there. So I think that he can be charged for that, for criminally negligent homicide, for a host of other charges, possibly for some negligent criminal charges as well.
Now, all three of you guys, at one point of your life, worked in district attorney's offices in different parts of New York State. But my question is, out of a tragedy sometimes comes policy. And certainly you would think this would come from elected legislators. But can it also, and sometimes should it also come from district attorney's offices, where they'll see people will be paralyzed by whatever fears, maybe not in this particular case, but say, you know what? Not only going to make an example of this guy, but I'm going to make it clear that we're going to enforce the following codes, because apparently this is not the only building of its kind. Are you scared about that kind of a thing, or do you say, no, that's what the office of the district attorney is for here. It's not just to prosecute crimes, but it's try and make sure here that everybody knows what this office will stand for. And if you don't get it in charge, we're going to go after you next.
The city needs to do this, not the district attorney's office, because when the city does it, that's what the city's charged to do. When the district attorney's office gets involved, then it becomes political, and then you start to get laws named after people. When you have that, then you end up having uneven application of that same law to someone who has a very minor violation of a code, and all of a sudden that person finds themselves being charged with homicide.
But DA investigators, you know, I have to say though, DA investigators can take the lead. I had a case in Brooklyn, a fire. It was a building that was illegally converted into rooms, and there was no means of egress. There was a fire. 5 people died. During my investigation of the case, I went to the block, and I went to all of the adjoining properties, and they're all constructed the same way. You know, the DA needs to take the lead, needs to get involved with the city, maybe put a DI on it and start investigating these things.
Explain what a DI is for the audience.
A detective investigator. And I think in situations like that, the DAs need to take the lead and start investigating these things and work in conjunction with the city, because the message needs to be sent to landlords. If you're going to create these types of environments, you're going to be prosecuted.
And the thing to me shocking was, maybe it shouldn't be, but how much of an open secret this was. This was certainly not something people didn't know about. Yes, there's math involved from economics and the rest here, but you know, Oakland's got to do better, frankly.
This is in every city.
Yep.
You'd be amazed. People have extension cords in the walls in their homes, and they don't even know it.
Well, we're going to continue to follow, obviously, the case and where it goes, both criminally and civilly. But coming up next, I've been told, why are you so shocked, Rich? And I still am. The mistrial in the case against Officer Slager. If you forget who he is, he's the guy who shot and killed Walter Scott and ran away, as Scott ran away, excuse me, and it was all caught on camera. Now, we're going to tell you what could happen when they retry the case. Stay with us.